Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for this series of professional learning shorts on teacher tips for family communication. My name is Taya Haller and I'll be guiding you through this video module, Creating a Class Newsletter. The overarching goal of this series is to strengthen communication between teachers and families in order to support and enhance student learning. The information and activities in this PL short have been aligned to the CEC and Cedar Center's high leverage practices and New Jersey's professional teaching standards referenced at the end. Because we know that professional learning must be interactive and relevant for it to be meaningful, the objectives of this video module are based on a praxis framework, inviting you into a process of reflecting on your experiences and beliefs about communicating via newsletters, describing how newsletters can strengthen the joining process, and determining your next steps in using newsletters to promote effective family communication. There will be moments when we ask you to pause the video in order to engage more fully in this process. Ideally, this process of reflection, information, and action is not solitary, but communal. Therefore, there will be moments when we encourage you to connect with others as part of this process as well. With that in mind, you'll get the most out of this PL short if you have the following resources readily on hand to mark up. The Communicating with Families inventory, which you used during the initial reflection in our series preview, and the professional learning guide that corresponds with this video. Feel free to pause the video now to print these resources or open them with a PDF annotation tool. Let's start with reflection. Feel free to use your PL guide as you consider these ideas. How are newsletters used in your school district or your school's community? Have you had positive experiences receiving newsletters of any kind in the past? If so, what made this a positive experience? Why do you think a class newsletter would be beneficial to families? What concerns do you have about creating your own class newsletter? What barriers may prevent you from doing so? How do you make your students' families feel welcomed, honored, and connected to learning? You can also add any relevant ideas to the Communicating with Families inventory under What You Do Now. Feel free to pause this video while you complete the reflection exercise. If you are engaging in this series with others, this would be a great discussion to have together. Feel free to pause this video to exchange ideas with a colleague. As we turn our attention to educational research and information about tech tools, feel free to add to the possibilities section of your Communicating with Families inventory. And use your PL guide to jot down any notes. Just as we teach our students to adopt a questioning stance when they approach nonfiction text, we should approach research and new information in the same way. Using the big questions proposed by Kylene Beers and Robert E. Probst can help us critically reflect on what's been presented. So we'll provide time for you to consider these questions. What surprised you? What changed, challenged, or confirmed what you already knew or had experienced? Extensive interviews with families in an urban, low socioeconomic school with high parental engagement indicated that, quote, school factors, specifically those that were relational in nature, had a major impact on parents' involvement, end quote. These interviews pointed to a concept in systems literature known as the joining process. This refers to a process in which school communities welcome families into the school, honor their participation by affirming their efforts, engagement styles, and funds of knowledge, and connect with families through a focus on the children and their learning. The result of the joining process is family empowerment. Families have an increased capacity to support their children's learning and are more excited about partnering with school staff. The process also overcomes historical barriers between schools and families because it creates an environment where many of the parents' past negative school experiences and/or feelings of alienation are diminished. Instead, they feel like members of the school family. Next, we'll look at the ways newsletters can help facilitate the joining process. There are many things we can include that welcome families into school life. For example, we can include a friendly greeting and our contact information with an invitation to engage in two-way communication. This sample newsletter opens with a brief note to families that includes both. Announcements about upcoming events, important dates, and class news is another way to welcome families. This example simply lists upcoming events, but you could also include reminders about those events, such as what to bring or how to RSVP, etc. Just as families are often welcomed into the school building to celebrate students, we can make space to do so in our newsletter. This could be done through class awards, such as Student of the Week or Month. In this sample newsletter, Reader's Theater is highlighted as a recent class achievement, and families are encouraged to watch the recording together. We can also invite families into our classroom by sharing photos of our classroom, students at work, or recent events. Here, a photo depicts a student applying one of the reading skills discussed in the newsletter. Another way to welcome families is to introduce them to different people in the school building, such as administrators, guidance counselors, child study team members, the librarian, etc. Because this newsletter was created for families with children nearing the end of second grade, introducing them to the third grade teachers is a great way to ensure they feel included in this important transition. Newsletters can also facilitate ways to honor families' unique contributions to our classroom learning environment. One way to do that is to create a space that recognizes parent participation and expresses appreciation for its impact on our students. Another way is to include opportunities for family volunteers to help with practical aspects of our classroom, such as organizing our class library or chaperoning a class trip, or to enhance our lessons with their expertise, language, traditions, and customs. In this sample newsletter, family members are invited to submit a favorite recipe for the class to make or use their own cooking expertise in a live demonstration. Finally, a newsletter might have an interactive portion that invites family members to provide feedback via a survey, participate in a poll, or respond to a question of the month. However, it's important for teachers to take family members' responses seriously by allowing their feedback to influence future lessons and activities. Lastly, newsletters are a great way to center students and connect their families to their learning experiences. One way to do that is to summarize what students have been or will be learning and invite families to support that learning in concrete ways. This might be through a You Can section that explains what parents can do to help their child with certain skills, practice or extension activities that families could do together, or conversation starters to use with their child. In this example, the summary of student learning is combined with a You Can section as the teacher describes specific reading skills and something the parent can do to reinforce them at home. If you're interested in more examples, we talk at length about different ways to empower families to support their child's learning at home in our PL Short on Texting with Communication apps. Newsletters can incorporate tips for student success, such as study skills or advice about transitioning into middle or high school. They can also connect families with community resources that relate to what their child is learning in school. Last but certainly not least, newsletters are a great way to amplify student voices, include students' descriptions of class activities, have students submit stories or articles, showcase student work, or simply quote students' responses to a particular activity. In this example, the teacher quotes different students reflecting on their Reader's Theater activity. As a quick recap, the primary benefit of newsletters is the way they facilitate the joining process by which families are welcomed into school life, honored for their unique contributions, and connected to their child's learning community. This process indirectly addresses historical power dynamics by valuing families as significant contributors to their child's education. It also directly addresses the barrier of stress overload, as families who may be unable to visit the classroom in person are able to see their children's learning through the newsletter, and teachers are able to share helpful information all in one place. When thinking about what you learned about newsletters and their benefits through the joining process, did anything surprise you? Did anything change or challenge what you already knew or have experienced? Did anything confirm your own experiences and knowledge? Feel free to pause this video as needed to jot down your responses to this information on your PL guide. Next, we'll take a look at a few tech tools teachers can use to create newsletters, particularly Canva and Google Suite products. Canva is a free online design tool that offers a free upgraded account for educators. It features numerous newsletter templates specifically designed for school. You can choose one of these templates and make it your own by customizing the text and images. There are a few different products in Google Suite that could be used for creating a newsletter: Docs, Slides, or Drawing. You can access these through the waffle from the Google homepage. But I recommend starting in Google Drive so that you can create it in the appropriate folder right away. Slides or Drawing would give you greater flexibility in moving items around more creatively, but consider which program you are most comfortable using and how important the creative design process is for you. Any of these options allow you to change the background and add shapes, images, word art, and text. If you choose slides or drawing, one tip is to adjust the layout to match a typical letter size. If you choose docs, try using the table function to set up the different parts of your newsletter. Any borders you don't want to be visible can be made transparent instead. Both Canva and the Google Suite products can be used on any device with the internet. They are free to use and collaborative in nature. This is significant if you would like others to contribute to the newsletter in any way, such as a co-teacher, other staff members, or students. The newsletters can also be saved as a PDF, which preserves any hyperlinks you may want to include and allows you to distribute both hard copies of the newsletter and send it digitally via email or text messaging. This feature is important since it increases the accessibility of your newsletter. Because Canva is created as a design tool, it has a very professional appearance. It also provides over 200 templates specifically designed for school newsletters, which is incredibly helpful for those who want to just focus on the content and not worry about designing their own layout. However, like any new tech tool, if you are not already familiar with Canva, there is likely to be a learning curve for use. Expect to spend a little bit of time up front getting to know the program and its different features. On the other hand, the Google Suite products have a familiar interface for many users, especially if you choose the program you've had the most experience using. This creates an easier on-ramp for many people. However, there are limited templates available, and none of them are particularly helpful for school newsletters. This means you'll have to spend some time up front creating your own layout or template in addition to curating the content that goes in it. There are, of course, numerous other tech tools available for creating a class newsletter. If you have or are familiar with Microsoft Word, Microsoft Publisher, or Pages, these would all be great tools that have easy-to-use templates. You can also find templates for classroom newsletters through other websites. For example, a search for newsletters on Teachers Pay Teachers yields over 40,000 results, almost 4,000 of which are free. Scholastic Teachables requires a paid subscription to use, but some local libraries include it as one of their databases. It's worth finding out if your library is one of them. If you are engaging in this series with others, this would be a great time to share your thoughts with one another. Feel free to pause the video to exchange ideas with a colleague. We'll end by developing a short action plan. First, take a look at the Communicating with Families Inventory Part 2. When considering the importance of the joining process and the role newsletters can play in this, do any new vulnerabilities, strengths, needs, or supports come to mind? Feel free to pause this video to jot down any new thoughts that come to your mind when you look back over these questions. Use these pages on your PL guide to map out the next steps you may take. As we recommend a couple of possible next steps, check off any actions that fit your needs and the needs of your students' families. First, determine how and when you'll send the newsletter. Consistency is key so that families learn to expect it and look for it. Identify the frequency. Do you want to send it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or quarterly? Then determine the method of distribution. Aim for the most accessibility with both hard copy and electronic versions. And lastly, identify the tech tool and template you'll use to create your newsletter. What steps do you need to take to get these things in place? Another action step is to consider the accessibility and design of your newsletter. For example, use clear, plain language. That means using short sentences, explaining academic terms that families may not know, and avoiding educational jargon. Check out the Center for Plain Language checklist in the Helpful Resources section of your PL guide for more details. We can also use readability calculators to ensure our newsletters are written at an appropriate readability level. According to the U.S. Department of Education, approximately 54% of U.S. adults between 16 and 74 years of age read below a 6th grade reading level. Two tools that could help you determine the readability of your newsletter are the Online Utility Readability Calculator and the Tray Readability Tool. Both provide statistics such as the average number of words per sentence, the complexity of words, and readability scores from a variety of indexes. Lastly, consider how the visual design can improve accessibility. Using a lot of white space, clear headings, bullets, selected images that don't crowd the page, and columns can make your newsletter easier to read. Next, we'll consider action steps regarding the content of your newsletter. One of the most important sections to consider including is one about what students are learning. It can be helpful to create a specific title for this section that you will use in every newsletter so that families know to look for it. Summarize what your students are currently learning. If this is long or includes a number of different skills, try to put the information in bullets and consider sharing images that demonstrate learning in action, such as photos of the students doing a related activity, student work showcasing this learning, or anchor charts in your classroom. Invite families into this learning by identifying clear actions for families to do together. For more ideas on how to do this, check out the action steps in our PL Short Texting with Communication apps. We all know that families love seeing photos of their children. Before jumping in with pictures of your students, however, make sure you obtain photo permission from their families that aligns with your method of distribution and your school policies. This is also an ideal opportunity for you to model respectful picture taken and sharing with your students. Let them know when you will be taking pictures and give them the chance to opt out. Show them the pictures that you plan to use in the newsletter and ask for their permission to use those specific pictures. Before sharing photos of student work, consider what permission you may want to obtain from your students. This models the appropriate use of intellectual property. And speaking of intellectual property, follow the guidelines for Creative Commons licenses and copyright laws when finding external images to include in your newsletter. The resources on our LRC-South Using Tech in the Classroom page for clip art, pictures, and music, as well as our quick tip video on Creative Commons, can provide guidance in this area. To create the most buzz about your newsletter, consider how you can include students in its creation. For example, you can hold class contests or polls about the title, graphics, articles, or topics in your newsletter. You can also create expectations and procedures for students to evaluate their own work and what they've been learning by submitting work they are particularly proud of, whether it's displayed in the newsletter or on a class bulletin board. This cultivates an environment of celebrating learning and hard work in your class. Lastly, consider outsourcing the different components of your newsletter to your students. What class jobs could you have that would streamline the newsletter creation process? Examples include a class photographer who would follow your guidelines for how and when to take pictures of activities or events, a graphic designer who could find or create additional images for your newsletter, a reporter who could write a summary of a special class activity or event, and an editor who would review photos, images, and articles before they are sent to you for layout. Based on your inventory of vulnerabilities and needs, along with our recommendations, what are your next steps? Be as specific as you can so that you have a clear, concrete plan in place. Include who in your professional learning community may be able to support you in this plan. Take a minute to pause this video if needed to think about and write down your next steps. Thank you for joining us. Keep the Communicating with Families inventory on hand for the next PL Short in this series. If this is the last video you'll be watching in the series, please share your thoughts with us. Look for the Give Feedback icon under this PL Short on the LRC South website.